What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Hope you're doing well whenever and wherever you are watching this. Now, if you've listened to the podcast before, you know we've had podcasters on, and you know we've had country music singers and songwriters on. Well, now we have a country podcaster who gets to interview a lot of singer-songwriters. Celine Trimarchi, host of Country with Celine, is joining the show today. Celine, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Jason. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
So for those who haven't listened to your podcast yet, what is Country with Celine?
Country with Celine is a podcast dedicated to shining the light on up-and-coming country artists. I started it back in January, and it kind of just took off from there. If you like country music, listening to Country with Celine is the place to be. We talk about all country songs, like literally everything. We talk to like so many country artists, and hopefully we gain new fans along the way. That's the goal.
Now, what was it, that really wanted you to start the podcast?
I love this question. Honestly, because of COVID, we all know 2020 was a crappy year. It was a really crappy year, and everything was kind of put on hold. And I'm in sports broadcasting, so everybody knows that was really put on hold. I decided to kind of take a different route, and I love country music, so I thought, why not start a country music podcast? Because realistically, there's not a lot that are out there. It's mostly just radio shows, like country radio shows that you listen to on the radio, or you see like stuff on TV. But there's no real podcast where people talk to up and coming country artists, because you always hear when they're famous, people want to talk to like a Luke Combs or a Luke Bryan because they're already so established, but nobody ever wants to talk to the ones that are on the rise. And those are the ones that you have to really keep your eye on. So I started it back in January. I had Sam James on it. It was, I don't even know how I got him, to be completely honest. He posted a video of him covering Life is Good by Drake, and I reached out to him and he said he'd do it. And then from there, it kind of just took off. And honestly, it was pretty much just because of COVID. I was stuck in a little rut, and I decided to keep pursuing what I wanted to do. And in entertainment, that's ultimately what I wanted to do. And I decided to go the country music way.
Now, seeing as for the most part you're dealing with up-and-coming country stars, mostly from the Canadian scene, have you had that point where people who've listened to your podcast then went and did a deep dive into the artists that you've interviewed, and so you've helped to spread awareness of up-and-coming artists?
Oh, no, for sure. And I mean, I interviewed quite a bit of Canadian country singers, but a lot of the people that I end up talking to are from Nashville themselves. Like, there's a lot of Nashville country singers that reach out to me from down there. So I get to hear their music. And then when I post it, a lot of people that follow Country with Celine, they'll send me messages like, oh my gosh, like that interview was amazing. I love his music. And then I go to check mutual followers with me and this person, and the people who reach out to me follow them, and now they're always posting their music and this and that. I had a really cool story. I just had a live show, and someone came out to this live show because she saw my post on Facebook, and she's from England. Like, she was from England, came to Toronto, loves country music, and she wanted to go out and have a good night. And she found my post on Facebook and she came, which was so freaking cool. And now she's a big like Paige Rutledge fan, Matt Morrison, like these people that I was interviewing there, which is really, really sick.
That's one of the things I always find kind of fascinating, especially when you get into the analytics of podcasts. And, for anyone who's never kind of created a podcast, it's one of those things where you put the podcast out there, then you go to the podcast service provider, and they kind of give you the breakdown of how often and where your podcast is listened to. And now you're saying that you've had people who came, happen to be in town from England and just, decided to go to your live show. In taking a look at the analytics, have you been surprised at how widespread the podcast is actually listened?
Oh my God, yes. I posted all my podcasts are on Anchor. I've never heard of Anchor in my life until I started posting on this. And I check like quite often where people are listening from. And I have people listening from Denmark. Like I have people listening in Brazil. There's a lot of people in the States too, like all in like the different states down there, even in Canada, but it's so like worldwide, this podcast, which is so crazy. Even like someone was from Uganda. Like what? Like how? I did not like it's crazy. Like people love country music everywhere, I guess.
Now, you just mentioned also that you started to do some live country with Celine shows. A couple of happened at Finn McCool's out in Vaughan, Ontario. So what was the idea, or what spawned the idea of like, you know what, I'm just going to do this live and in person?
Well, for one, I was like ever since I started it, the goal was to eventually do live shows. It's just because of COVID, we couldn't really do any live shows. So it was mostly all podcasts. And especially with a lot of the people that I talked to from the States, it's not like they're going to come to Toronto just to perform at Finn McCool's for like no money. You know what I mean? But I wanted to actually get to meet a lot of these artists because I haven't met a lot of them, because most of them have been just like what you and me are doing on Zoom. But I wanted to get country music out there. And plus in Vaughan, if you live in Toronto in general, or even like in Vaughan, there's like no country music like anywhere. And there's quite a bit of country music fans. I mean, maybe some people don't want to admit that they're a fan, but we all know that they are. So I just decided to put on a live show and help the artists too, because they were in kind of a run too, like with last year not being able to perform anywhere. So I thought, why not do Country with Celine live in Vaughan, where it's not really country, and have artists come out and perform and just have like a fun night for everybody.
What's been the response? Because obviously, as you just said, there's been a lack of live music. Speaking as a musician, it's also been tough, not being able to go out and play live. But for you to be able to bring some musicians out, to have a bit of a live show, what's been the response like for people who have probably been very starved of live music?
Oh, especially with the artists, they've all been so grateful, because all they want to do is just go out and perform. And I mean, by the end of the night, I usually try to collect like some money for them, because I feel bad. They're coming all this way from like wherever. Like someone I think came from Cambridge, like just to come to perform, which is like, oh wow, like coming all the way to Vaughan. But so I've been collecting like some money for the people, but a lot of them are saying, you know what, honestly, I don't even want the money. I just want to come out and perform, because it was put on hold for so long. And even with a lot of the people who come out, they're just so happy to be out in general and be around people, because we were so starved of that for so long. So it's been really good. The feedback has been quite amazing, and I can't wait to start doing them again.
Now, being a country music fan yourself, and being someone who would go out to festivals and concerts, how about you? How has this last almost 2 years now affected you as a live music and country music fan?
Oh my gosh, country music was my summer. Like I would go to the Budweiser stage. I would go to Boots and Hearts. I would try to find all like these like small country concerts, like anywhere I could find, and I couldn't find anything. It was so sad. It was really, really sad. That's all I can say. But now that they're finally starting again, it's nice to get back into the groove, but it's not at full force as it used to be, but hopefully it will happen again soon, or else I'm just going to have to go to the States. Let's be honest here.
Is the plan with these live shows to continue to do them live and eventually tape the live show and use that as a podcast episode? Because up until now, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been mostly like this, Zoom interviews.
No, it has been all Zoom interviews. I would love to do, honestly, I never even thought about recording them and using those as podcasts. I probably should. That's a good idea. But the goal is just to make it live for like anybody coming out to watch the show, just instead of always watching podcasts, just to see it in person. And a lot of the people as well that are coming in person to sing, I've talked to them on a podcast. So it's like you get to hear their introduction beforehand, like, so you get to know about them, and then you get to actually meet them, and then we just chat about something different. But that's a good idea, Jason. I will probably put that into consideration.
When you think about, the heyday of Much Music, and even, CMT at the time, they had original programming you know, created to highlight Canadian country music. And you don't really see a lot of that programming on traditional television or even, specialty channels anymore, where it's created to highlight Canadian talent. And that's kind of had to go to things like podcasts, things like YouTube and, YouTube shows and the like. Do you ever see a chance where Country with Celine either gets picked up by a Sirius XM or eventually gets picked up by a CMT to create original Canadian content that showcases Canadian country music?
I would absolutely love that. Oh my gosh. That is honestly one of my goals, is for someone to pick up Country with Celine. Like even CBC Country on Sirius XM, they play all Canadian country singers, and to have like a segment on there of Country with Celine where I get to actually talk to the artists and then we'll get to hear their songs and just like have fun and converse would be amazing. Or even The Highway, which I would absolutely love if The Highway picked it up, because they're American, and I understand sometimes with like Americans they want to kind of keep that to themselves, like just play American country singers, but when Canadian country singers become big, then they'll start to play them. But it would be nice to kind of throw like Highway new finds of Canadian country singers down there. So even if The Highway picks it up, I would be so happy.
Now, you mentioned that you went to school for sports broadcasting, so to make the jump from, going for a sports broadcasting career to, I'm going to talk about country music now. How did you make that transition? And do you find it hard to disassociate the sports side of you with the country side of you?
Not really. I didn't think it was that hard. I mean, it's just different when you go from talking about sports with every single podcast that you do to talking about music. But a lot of people that I interview, they are sports like fanatics. So I kind of throw in some like sports related stuff in there. Like sometimes I'll talk about the Leafs or I mentioned, I think, the Boston and the Leafs series before, which I'm not going to mention that now. But I mentioned like some things, and it's pretty fun. Even like with my live show, like we were talking about the Leafs because the Leafs were playing that night. So I still incorporate sports in there, and I'm saying Leafs because yes, I'm biased. I'm from Toronto. I like the Leafs, but I do incorporate it quite a bit still. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds, just not completely full force with sports.
Now, one of the comments from one of your past guests, had a comment about your show, and they said that being on your show, it wasn't just your traditional podcast interview questions. It was very much a conversation. So when you're preparing to interview, one of these, country music singer-songwriters, do you go into it with that host reporter mentality, or do you go into it with kind of like the, let's just chat and have some fun kind of mentality?
No, for sure. I mean, in the beginning, when I first started it, I was really like by the book, like ask them questions, have an introduction, like know what I need to say, then get the heck out. It was more like that. But then over time, I just got more comfortable with it, and it's become more of a conversation. So like I rather just talk to the person, and wherever the conversation flows, it flows. Now I add in like a couple of games. So we play a couple of games now at the end. So it's I want to make it really like down to earth, and just so the listeners can get to know the artist more on a personal level rather than just a formal interview type of level.
Now, for someone who's gone to broadcasting school, who has formal training to be a host or to be a reporter, and then to go into a conversation type scenario, do you have to kind of pull back from the lessons that you had and say, well, no, now we're just going to have a conversation?
Yes, all the time. Oh my gosh. I get carried away sometimes if like with a lot of the things that I say. And sometimes when someone talks too long as well, it's like, okay, like I try to cut in there to like stop them from talking, because going to broadcasting school, you're so used to saying a question and getting out and then letting the answer kind of wrap up. And then, because it's usually like a 2-minute conversation or a 3-minute conversation that we would be having. But this is really different. But now that I'm interviewing people in person as well, because I got to go to a couple events this past summer, it's more of that host. It's not so much of a conversation. It's more of the host, because I'm not going to have a conversation like a random conversation right there when I want it to be professional so I can eventually put on my demo reel as well.
Do you find it harder to prepare for an in-person interview than it is, for an interview over Zoom? Or is it harder to be disconnected / basically over a computer than it is to be in person?
The only thing that I would say would be harder is that when it's in person, you have to be on your A game, because rather than when it's on Zoom, you can cut, it's all pre-recorded. So you can just, if you say something you don't like, cut it out. If the question or the answer goes on way too long, cut it out. But when it's in person, you have to no mistakes, because you can't cut that, and you can't say, oh wait, let me retake that. You can't do any of that. So that's would be the only big difference, and it would be quite harder to do in person.
Now let's get back to that sports background a little bit, because very recently you became the in-arena host for the Mississauga Steelheads of the Ontario Hockey League. How is that experience going from, just a small little, Zoom interview with country music, musicians, to now I'm in a hockey arena and I got a large crowd and I have to play to that almost like a musician would play to an arena?
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you brought that up. I'm so happy I got that job. Honestly, what I'm going to say about that is you got to be very persistent in life and determined in life to get what you want to get. It's different in the sense that it's live, like I said, and it's sports. So yes, going from country music, chatting and having conversations to talking about hockey, it's quite a transition, but I always loved hockey, and being an arena host was something that I always wanted to do. So I'm getting really comfortable with that role. And it's pretty fun because I still incorporate country with Celine in there, because before the game starts, they ask for songs to play during the game, and I'll throw in artists that I've talked to. So while the game's going on, they'll play Canadian artists or artists from Nashville, and it's I did that. That's my country with Celine in here. So it's pretty cool how that's all happening.
So when you get a chance to interview the players, let's be honest, most athlete interviews are very, stick to the game plan, 100%, put pucks on the net, good things will happen. Very, almost prepared answers. And the same thing with musicians. When they have a single come out, they're pretty much prepared to talk about that single and the things that are normally going to come up. So how do you, as an interviewer, get people out of that pre-planned, pre-programmed response and get the good answers out of them?
I mean, to be completely honest, when it comes to sports, when it comes to athletes, it's kind of hard to get that out of them, because especially hockey players, they're so used to saying those classic cliches. But when you want to get a good answer out of an athlete, or even out of anybody, you just have to do more research on the person and ask more of a complex answer, rather than just oh, what did you think when the puck went in, or something generic like that, or what happened in the third period. So you want to ask more of an interesting question where the fans are going to be oh, that's a good question, and then you'll get a different answer. But usually it's always you got to get the puck deep. So that's pretty much what you get.
Stick to the game plan, one shift at a time. Yeah.
Seriously.
Keep the skates moving. We'll just talk in hockey cliches now for the rest of the night. But I do have to ask, because you mentioned research. How much research goes into a day with the Steelheads, and how much research goes into an episode of Country with Celine?
Well, beforehand with Country with Celine, I would research everything within a day before, but now I'm a lot more comfortable with it. So if an interview, let's say, is at 1:00, I'll start looking at stuff around 12, and it's just pretty much going on their bio, looking at their Instagram, listening to their songs, and then you can come up with questions from there. And with the Steelheads, honestly, it's kind of difficult you can prepare. Of course you can prepare. You look at their last previous games and you can come up with a question like that. But when the game goes on as well, if something sporadically happens, like with the last minute in the third period, you literally have like a minute left to think of a question, to do some research real quick. So, I mean, it kind of depends how the game goes when it comes to hockey as well. But you can still do research from like the days before, and you talk about like how many goals they've put up so far, who's leading the team in points, or this and that. So you can kind of come up with a question from that.
So now I have to ask, because you have these, these dual opportunities that you have, country with Celine and with the Mississauga Steelheads, which one would you rather see take off to become that very professional? Like, this is the career.
Jason, seriously?
Oh yeah, I'm putting you right on the spot here, Celine.
You're asking me this question? Oh my gosh. Honestly, okay. I'm going to tell you my goal, and it is both. Like, both of them are included in here because this is the goal. I want to become the Nashville Predators host. Okay. So for one, I want to move to Nashville. And number two, I want to be the host of country music festivals. I want to have a job with a radio network in Nashville. So just by going off of that, you can see how I just pulled on both of them and I put it into one, because working for the Preds would be an absolute dream, and getting to stay in Nashville and be surrounded by country music would just, my life would be complete, honestly.
Okay, we're going to put this out there into the universe, and we'll see if we can manifest this into reality here. You have one guest, your choice.
Okay.
Country with Celine.
Yep.
Who do you get?
Luke Combs, easy peasy, like that. Done. First name that popped into my head. He is such a talent, and so many of his songs are just the way they hit me. Because I mean, usually you would think someone would say Alan Jackson or Dolly Parton or Garth Brooks, right? Like a legend. But Luke Combs to me is he's just amazing, and his songs are. Especially there's one particular song that just caught me, and I've been the biggest fan of his for years because he's just such a talent, and he's so nice. To be able to interview him and get to know him would honestly just a dream. It would be just a dream. Putting that on the universe. Yes, Luke Combs, Country with Celine.
You're listening to the Major Mixtape Podcast. Our host today, Celine Trimarchi, the host of Country with Celine and the in-arena host for the OHL's Mississauga Steelheads. We're going to step away for a quick second, but when we come back, we're going to learn a little bit more about Celine.
What's up, Combat Crew? Matt here from the Mortal Kombat Podcast, and I wanted to take a second to let you all know that on Friday, December 17th, starting at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, we will be hosting our annual charity stream live at twitch.tv/naturalhatrick. That's NTRLHATTRICK. And this year, we will be raising funds for Heart Support and their mission to make mental health care more accessible for all. We will be playing a custom 5e D&D game where your donations directly affect the game. You can cast creatures to battle our heroes, cast spells for or against them, buy a mystery token to put down the Plinko board, or summon a mighty dragon. And we are setting out to raise $1,000, and we would love to have you come hang out and have some fun with us. And as an added bonus, if we make our goal of $1,000, the folks from the podcast will be doing the One Chip Challenge live on that stream. Seriously, Google it. It's pretty wicked. Hope to see you all there on Friday, December 17th, starting at 4 p.m. Pacific Time.
Welcome back to the Major Mixtape Podcast. Our guest today, Celine Trimarchi. She's the host of the podcast Country with Celine and the in-arena host for the OHL's Mississauga Steelheads. Now, Celine, let's talk a little bit about you. And I want to pop back to your YouTube channel where you have Country with Celine. But if you scroll down in the video section, there's a few covers. There's a few covers of you on guitar singing along. So I now have to ask, is there a possibility of a Celine Trimarchi original song maybe sometime down the road getting out there?
I can't believe you scrolled that far down.
I do my research when I get out of these interviews. So.
Oh my God, I honestly forgot they were on there. Yeah, so I always like enjoyed singing, but I never ever sang in front of people. Like I kept that very personal. Like only my mother or my couple of my like closest like family members have ever heard me sing. But it was because of COVID. I was kind of stuck at home, and everyone was kind of taking up different passions and hobbies and going with them. Like a lot of people started cake pops or cupcakes or balloons or this and that, whatever it was. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start throwing out covers out there and see if anything happens. So that's why I started putting those out there. But I don't think you're ever gonna see like a country with Celine cover out there. No, I mean like that. If it happens, that's gonna happen down the road, like not now.
Obviously, when you create a podcast, you're putting yourself out there. And as you just mentioned, you kind of kept your singing to yourself. Yeah. Is there ever a chance, or was there ever a dream for you to kind of get out there and maybe sing a song with a band, or at least create some original music?
Yeah, when I was a kid, that was like my goal was to be a country singer. I grew up listening to so many different country singers, but especially Celine Dion. I grew up listening to Celine Dion. I mean, it's because my name is Celine, right? But that was always the goal. Like I remember when I was a kid, I would go to my grandma's basement and put all my like stuffed animals on the couch, and then I would just like perform songs to them, because my mom always wanted to be a singer. So I guess like that kind of took a toll on me, and then I wanted to become a singer. But that was the goal for quite a long time. Even like throughout high school, I would always like practice singing Taylor Swift. But then I don't know, that kind of faded out, and I picked up this passion instead. And I guess because singing to me, I'm very vulnerable and I don't like being that vulnerable. So, I mean, maybe one day it will happen, but right now it's okay.
Obviously, when you decide to learn to play a song, or you decide to, even record it and put the cover out there on YouTube, what is it about the song that makes you, that kind of draws you to it?
Well, if you noticed, my songs were Luke Combs, literally who I just said. I just think he's such a talent. Like the songs that I chose, I think it was Beautiful Crazy, Must Have Never Met You, and I think there might have been one. Oh, Dan and Shay. I posted a Dan and Shay. Just songs like that, they all mean something to me, especially When I Pray For You by Dan and Shay. I don't know, whenever I sing that song, I just think of like my family. So that's how, when I put out a song, like a cover like that, it means something to me. I wouldn't just put out like a rap song. Like, no.
See, now I have to hear a Celine Trimarchi rap song. You do realize that has to happen.
Do you know I used to write raps? Yeah, I know. Everybody at my school, like when I was at CSM, everybody there was like, oh, Celine, like you have to let us hear a rap song, this and that. Cause it was just a coping thing. Like when stuff would happen and I needed an outlet, I would just rap and just like write raps. And that was just an outlet, like I said, but nobody will ever hear them. No.
You just mentioned that, things happen, you lean on, in your case, creating raps and whatnot. But obviously when things do kind of, take a turn, whether it be for the better or for the worse, we have a tendency to sometimes lean on music to kind of get us through things. So for you, when things turn, what do you lean to musically?
Like what type of artist do I lean to? Like song? Well, I'll be really personal right now. When everything kind of happened with my dad, when that whole situation was going on, now I listen to a lot of like Christian songs. If I'm being completely honest, I really found a love for those type of songs, a real comforting. And any type of song that speaks about the other side is where I find a lot of comfort. And even listening to songs about people kind of chasing their dreams, I lean a lot to those as well. But yeah, those would be like the songs that I would like lean to, especially Christian though, for sure.
You mentioned there's a vulnerability in singing and performing, and obviously as you're interviewing singers and songwriters, they themselves are putting themselves out there as vulnerable people, putting their music out there. Yeah. Do you find initially when you start an interview that your guest is sometimes not necessarily guarded, but at least prepared to answer certain things? And how do you get past that to get to the vulnerability of the artist?
There's a lot of people that are shy, I would say, when I talk to them. They're very timid. But if you just keep the conversation casual and you bring up your own personal experiences or how you can relate to something, then they become more open and more willing to kind of express like how they feel about something, or just give me an answer that everybody wants to hear at the same time. But yeah, just be more personal. That's honestly what it is. Because Jason, if I'm personal with you, you're gonna feel like, okay, I can be the same with you, and it's mutual. So that's all I have to do.
And now you mentioned the vulnerability in singing. There's a vulnerability for yourself as well. Being that personal with the guest. Was that hard for you to be able to get past there and say, no, you know what? I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to put myself out there, because it is there's that hurdle that you have to say, okay, this is my idea. And then you leap the hurdle, say, but now it's going to get out there. And now it's me out there. Well,
yeah, the beginning when I started the podcast, there was a big hump that I had to get over, because I was kind of scared. I'm like, I don't know how people are going to react. I don't know if I'm going to be good at this. Are people even going to listen? Am I going to have a following? Are people going to want to come on the podcast? And then I would be vulnerable at that point, because I made a separate account for Country with Celine, and I didn't want to post Country with Celine on my main account because people I know follow my main account. So I didn't want them to know like, oh, she has this country podcast. Like, why does she have this? So that was like my mentality, which is really, really, really naive and pretty dumb. Like you shouldn't think like that. But then I just posted one out, and I'm like, you know what? This is what I enjoy. I don't care what people think. If they like it, if they don't like it, like great if they like it. But if they don't like it, I don't really care. So I just kind of jumped over, and I got more confident with that too. Once you get over that mentality of like what people think, because that's the worst one to get over. And it's really, really, really hard, but it's possible.
You mentioned, that worry of, I put this out there, is anyone even going to listen? And obviously in the early days of any creative output, you're going to have those days where you're just happy that, oh, look, one person listened. Is it hard as a creator to look at the analytics and go, why am I even doing this? If the numbers are lower than you would hoped?
Honestly, I looked at that in the beginning, and I was very hard on myself when the numbers weren't that high. But now it's like, honestly, I don't even care if they're high or not, because I enjoy talking to all these up and coming singers. And I know something good is going to happen out of this. Like whether I have 1, 2, or 200 views, I know at the end of the day, Country with Celine will take off. Someone will pick it up, and I'll have a platform on CBC. Like I said before, hypothetically, let me say CBC. I would be on there and I would pick up their views. So like the views will still go up by that point. But right now I just really enjoy just talking to everybody. And even with the live shows, like sometimes, like one time, nobody really came out to one, and it's kind of hard, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I'm going to make the best out of it with the people who are here. Like we'll still have fun. So yeah.
Obviously a lot of, a person's musical taste kind of stems from what was around the house as they were growing up. So for you, for young Celine, what was it that got you into country?
My mother would always listen to, like, I could vividly remember Faith Hill, like all the time. She always listened to Faith Hill, or even Tim Mcgraw. My mom would always listen to Tim Mcgraw too. But so my country side of me came from my mom. But another genre that was always playing when I was younger was house. My dad loved house music and rock and roll. So I always would listen to rock and house and then country. So that's how the country thing came about. It's all my mom's fault.
There comes a point in everyone's life when they're young, that they go to the record store with their own money, whether it's birthday money, Christmas money, whatever, but they're going to the record store for themselves and they buy that first album that's truly their own. Do you remember what that first album you bought for yourself was?
Oh my gosh. I can't remember exactly what it would have, like what it was, but I am pretty certain it was probably Hilary Duff. Hilary Duff was like, because I love Lizzie McGuire. So I'm pretty sure it was most likely Hilary Duff.
You do realize that brings us to the big part, the big question of the podcast. So if you, Celine Trimarchi, had to introduce yourself to a total stranger, but instead of saying, "Hi, I'm Celine, go listen to Country with Celine," you hand them a mixtape, and on that tape are songs that tell the story of you. What songs are on that tape and why are those songs there?
Okay, so the first song that I would have on this is called Love Triangle by Raelyn. It's about growing up with divorced parents. So I grew up with divorced parents. I can understand that song inside and out, and I cry every single time I hear it. So that would be number one. Number two would be Humble and Kind by Mcgraw, because my family always taught me to always be humble and kind, always lend a helping hand to anybody who's in need. Another one would be Someone's Watching Over Me by Hilary Duff, because I know my dad's always watching over me with everything that I do. Another one would be Breakaway by Kelly Clarkson, because you gotta break away and chase after what you want to do, which is exactly what I'm doing. And the last one is She's Country by Jason Aldean, because I am country head to toe, minus living in Vaughan.
For anyone who's listening right now to this interview, and they have their own idea for whether it be a podcast or a dream job or whatever the case may be, for someone who's listening to us right now and is inspired by you, what would you say to them?
Just do it. Honestly, I would just say, just do it. If you have a dream, you have to go after that dream, because if you don't, nobody's going to do it. So you have to be your own motivation. And because, the quote that I always look at, but I can't remember exactly because it's really, really, really long, but it's the Pursuit of Happiness quote, where Will Smith was talking to his son, and he was just saying, if you have a dream, you have to protect that dream. If somebody tells you you can't do something, it's because they can't do it themselves. So if you want to get something, you go get it, period. So that quote, I just always live by, and it's so true. So just do it. Chase what you want to do.
Celine, thank you so much for this. Where can our listeners find Country with Celine out there?
Country with Celine, go to our Instagram at Country with Celine. You can check out my YouTube at Celine Trimarchi. That's where all the podcasts get posted, all the video ones. And if you want to just listen, it's on Spotify, Country with Celine, Apple Music, Country with Celine. And if you want to follow along on Facebook as well, Country with Celine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to this edition of the Major Mixtape Podcast. Now, if you're listening to us on an audio streaming service, you can watch this entire interview over on YouTube. But if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you can actually head on over to wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, TuneIn, Good Pods, wherever you get us. Download, listen to us on the go. This has been the Major Mixtape Podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Until next time, take care.